punch the record button, and I'm going to get the closed captioning on. Help out there a little bit. For some of you, this may be the first in the lecture series that you've checked out with us, because I have a class that starts second 8 weeks, and so you may just be coming in and getting to see part of this. So you picked a good one to start, but all of the other lectures that have come before this one are available on our site and at the ARC Orchestra, and I have that up in your Canvas site, but I'll send that out to you again, and you can get some credit for attending those, watching the recordings and writing a little synopsis of what you saw. So if you're interested in that, it's all available to you. So I'd like to introduce Laura Pritchard to you. Laura has a PhD there. She's waving there. Laura has a PhD in musicology and a master's in choral music from the University of Illinois, and a bachelor's degree in music and modern languages from Yale. She is a known lecturer and particularly a college professor in the Bay Area at Cal State East Bay. She's taught at San Francisco State University. I think she mentioned to me tonight that she's currently at University of Massachusetts doing some things, and Northeastern University. She's been invited to lecture at Harvard and Oxford and Goldsmiths London and NYU, and has read papers at major conferences in Russia and Ireland and Newfoundland and Wales and Hawaii. What I find most interesting, because she is like what they would call a triple threat. She does all of these things, plus she's contributing to major publications, and she has 36 entries in the Encyclopedia of Latin American Popular Music, which is very cool. I'd like to hear about that actually sometime. And the New Grove Dictionary, which is the standard music dictionary. She has contributions to that. And the forthcoming Sage Encyclopedia of Music and Culture, which I didn't know a lot about, but I checked out tonight before this lecture and saw a preview. And actually, Laura, I don't know if that has actually come out completely yet, but boy, it looks great.
Yeah, I think there's an online link for the people who wrote in it, and everyone's still reviewing it, but it'll be a great big thick book about world music.
Yeah, it looks amazing, and I saw the list of contributors there, and all the different I don't know if essays is the right word, but all the different entries, and that that looks wonderful. So anyway, thank you for being here with us tonight, and everybody, please help me welcome with a clap or a signal of some kind, Laura Pritchard. Yeah, jazz hands, or you can do like a coffee shop in the 60s.
Cool. Let's see. Could I ask to be made a co-host, and then I'll be able to share my screen, because it's such a luxury in this environment that we can show pictures and share images, whereas usually when I'm standing up in front of an orchestra before a concert, it's just me and the mouth, talking a little bit of my hand waving. So cool. Okay, so sometimes I'm going to turn off my camera. If I'm going to show video, I'll turn off my camera, and that makes my computer a little bit faster. So my goal is to talk to you a bit about Mozart, and especially his collaboration working on text by a very famous writer from the middle 1700s who went by the name of Beaumarchais, and talk about how common it was for people to have multiple jobs in that period if they were in transition between the old world of being a servant and having one job their whole life, or being like a high-level aristocrat who might study and might have some skills but didn't really have to work for a living. So talk about how his music relates to those worlds and the kind of transition of life and lifestyle that was happening in the 1700s. So before I start, Stephen, what topics have you heard already?
Well, let's see. We've most everyone here has watched the movie Amadeus, and we did a little deconstruction of that and talked about that movie. I did an introduction to to the series, and we talked about the event where Mozart copied music or upon one hearing, as the tale goes, went home and wrote that out, the secret piece at the Vatican. So we've talked about that. We had a demographer join us last time who talked about some of the different statistical things that happened during the Enlightenment and what the Enlightenment was about.
Great.
Yeah, and then we've had some discussion about Mozart's involvement with the Masons and his sort of waffling back and forth about, you know, which direction he really was going to go with sort of this these new ideas with the Enlightenment and how his music reflected that. So I think I got everybody there. That's
Great.
about where we are.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll try to add to that, and I might review a few of those general ideas. Let me go ahead and share my screen. It should look like a wave if it's working correctly. And let me move the window at the top out of the way and ask it to play. Let's see if we can get this. Mozart, and specifically his opera Marriage of Figaro, Mozart was very much a man of his time, and a lot of ideas and things that were new and in transition are reflected in his life. And in my opinion, of all of his works, the one that's the sort of most autobiographical and is really a lot like what he thought and how he talked to his friends and the way he related to the people he cared about is his opera, The Marriage of Figaro. And if you've recently seen Amadeus, which is based on that great 1980 play by Peter Schaeffer, you may remember the line where Mozart's trying to convince a possible employer that opera is such a great form because you can do much more than you can do in real life. If in real life, multiple people are speaking, you have chaos and cacophony. And when they are singing, when you can organize it with music, everything is possible. You can do all these cooler, more complex things, and you can kind of really feel like you're there. So let's see, I'm gonna make my side screen. How do I make this? I want to minimize it, but my cursor has disappeared. Just 1 second. Let me make this smaller. Pardon me just a second. Okay, let me go over here and make myself tiny out of the way. All right, so now it should look better. All right, you may know a bit about Mozart's life, that he was from what ended up being a small family. This is a family photograph that was taken after his mother had passed away in the bottom left corner. And the mother and the father were happily married. The father was actually from a German family, not originally an Austrian family. And that family, the professions of the men were more like what we would call masons and engineers. They made books, they bound and published books, they built bridges, they worked on road surfaces. And so the father of Mozart was expected to go into one of these family trades. And it turned out he was really gifted at the violin. You see him there holding a violin. And he even wrote one of the leading books of his time on how to play the violin. So he made a huge abrupt switch in kind of the family history and hoped that his children would also be musicians. Now, Mozart's father, Leopold, and Mozart's mother, Maria Anna, actually had 7 children, but only the 2 children you see survived to become adults. So there was a lot of pressure on the young boy to be successful and to carry on with the father's new chosen profession of music because he was the only surviving son and he'd been really sickly as a baby. So it makes sense that the mother, even though she's passed away, is still kind of in the center of the family. The young Mozart wrote her letters almost every day of his life as a young man, traveling or not, performing or not. And then Mozart is dressed in the brightest color and he's kind of seated in the center of the living family. And you can see he's playing a duet with his sister and their hands are crossing. So it's kind of a playful picture. It's not a dour, serious family portrait. And that red jacket is going to come back. Notice when Mozart gets to choose how he is depicted, he tends to use this particular color and this particular style. I put on the right an image from his opera, The Marriage of Figaro, and this is a DVD set that came out in the 90s. And the name of the opera company is on the top in the center. It says Teatro alla Scala, and that means the theater of the steps. And that has become, over the last 200 years, one of the leading and biggest and most impressive places to have premieres of works and to have works done. And Mozart's opera, The Marriage of Figaro, has become a favorite there at La Scala. It's sort of like how movies used to all open at the Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, and everyone would flock there, and it was a big deal, and they would treat a premiere really differently. Mozart definitely experienced some of that in his lifetime. And Italian music and writing, even if you weren't originally Italian, writing music for Italian texts was sort of the high point of the art forms that he was studying. So the young Mozart went with his father. They actually lived in London. They wanted to go to Dublin, but they didn't get across to Dublin. So too bad for us for St. Patrick's Day. But Mozart learned quite a bit of English as a young man. They traveled all through France, and he made friends with people who would later be kings and queens in France. He traveled all through Germany and Austria. German was his first, I guess, his native language. And then he and his father also had a chance to go to Italy a couple of times, and he studied in Italy and learned Italian, and they made a lot of friends and professional connections. So all throughout Mozart's life, he was able to invite Italian star singers to come wherever he was and be featured in his performances. All right. Now Mozart, this is a long list of particular songs, and you don't have to memorize this list, but I basically wrote this out because I was curious when I was reading about Mozart and his father, how did they get involved in something called Freemasonry? Mozart and his father were based in Salzburg, and Salzburg was kind of its own country when he was a young man. It had its own ruler, and it was a city-state, and it was called Salzburg because it had salt mines. So Salzburg kind of means salt city, or we have the American Salt Lake City, basically the same name. But Mozart wanted to go to the great capital of his time, sort of the New York City of his time, which of the German-speaking world was Vienna. So when Mozart kind of grew and became of age and was in his young 20s, kind of college age, he got to go to Vienna, and eventually his father came to visit him many times. And one of the ways to get in with artistic and sort of intellectual society in Vienna was to join a lodge of Freemasons. And so they sort of shopped around when they got there. There was a lodge that was very large. It had several hundred members, and it published its own magazine, and they had scientific experiment talks. And the problem with that lodge is nobody in that lodge was Catholic. And so they joined this smaller lodge. You can see a picture here, and it had about 40 members, and all the members of the smaller lodge of Masons were Catholic. And so they had meetings, they raised money for charitable causes, they took care of each other's families. For example, one of Mozart's friends said that he was one of the most generous people he knew, and he would take the coat off of his back and give it to you. If he found out that a family was having trouble that he knew through this Masonic society, he would give all of his money that week to the family in need and not keep any for himself. So you could argue that although he's often presented as eccentric and a little wild, that this kind of club, this is a gentleman's club interested in arts and sciences, was something that was really important to him in addition to his life as a musician. And he actually wrote a lot of music for them. So if you look at the special music he wrote for them, up here in the top, we have a song for the Johannes Lodge, the Johannes Loga, and it's called O Heiliges Band der Freundschaft treuer Brüder, which means O Holy Bond, or O Holy Band, like group, of Freundschaft is friendship, treuer Brüder, between or of true brothers. So songs that are kind of like, I was a Girl Scout when I was a little kid, so the like Brownie Scout, Girl Scout songs. He wrote Masonic friendship songs. He wrote entertainment music for them. So the second thing is a cantata sung with a small orchestra, and you can see how small the room was that they met in. A lot of them would bring their violins and instruments with them. and play. He wrote songs for installations of new members. That's the third thing. He wrote a cantata celebrating the different joys of being in the club. The fifth thing, if someone in the Masonic Lodge died, he would write funeral music for them. Below that, 2 songs for tenor and organ. He wrote opening and closing ceremonial music for the beginning of the year of talks and the end of the year of talks. He wrote a short song cycle, a cantata for solo, tenor, and piano. He actually wrote that for one of his in-laws to sing. He wrote another little cantata at the bottom, and then I'm not sure if you can see the very last thing on the page. It says opera influenced by Masonic numbers. They have lots of triangles and threes. By Masonic philosophy, ideas of self-improvement, and Masonic symbols. And that's the opera, The Magic Flute, from the very last year of his life. So I think that's interesting, and it's important because it distinguishes him from many, many other composers of the 1700s who are kind of known as musical servants to one or a variety of masters, and who mostly wrote music to please the master. This would be an example of if one of you were a composer, if you decided to write opening and closing music for each one of these talks as part of this class, or music for a sporting event that you were involved with, sort of a personal joy of writing. And he was doing this throughout the 1780s and until 1791 when he passed away. So his whole late 20s and early 30s. Now, one of his favorite authors was alive at the same time. If you think, when was Mozart alive? He was born in 1756. So he was 30 years younger than this author, and he died in 1791. So his whole lifespan took place inside the lifespan of this famous man. This is a French author, probably one of the best known writers in the middle of the 1700s. And he's kind of the subject of my talk. His first name was Pierre, which means Peter, so Pierre Augustin, and his family name was Caron, C-A-R-O-N. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see a nickname for him, Fils Caron. The F-I-L-S means son of or junior, and then Caron is his father's name. So when he would get introduced to people as a young man, they would say, here's little Pierre, son of the famous watchmaker, Sir Caron or Mr. Caron. And sometimes if his first name wasn't said, they said, here is Monsieur Caron, Mr. Caron, and here is son of Caron, Fils Caron. And so very often he would be teased, and people would say that over and over, Fils Caron, Fils Caron, Fils Caron. And we think his plays with the main character Figaro, that name, Figaro, 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 that comes from him being called son of Caron or Caron Jr. So maybe he's the title character. Maybe he's Figaro, the very smart servant that can outwit his master, who is young and in love and is a man of the world of the coming revolutions. There's also a young character in some of the Figaro plays, actually all 3 of the Figaro plays, called Cherubin or Cherubin or Carabino or Carabino. And this has on purpose the word cherub in it. He's a cute little boy. And in the first play, he is first falling in love. So he falls in love with all the older women, and he sings about how he is burning with fire and he's freezing with love, and it's overcoming him, and how he feels that pink in his face for the very first time. And so some people think that Beaumarchais has put a little bit of himself both into the title character Figaro and also into this Carabino young man. Now the rest of his name, the name he became known for, the de and the Beaumarchais, that is a noble title that he paid for and made up after his first marriage. So it's sort of a pen name, if you will, a made up name. And the 3 plays he became best known for are called his Figaro plays. The main character is a barber, a servant of a count, and everyone in it is based on someone that he knew. The dates of the 3 plays show how it kind of spaces out throughout Beaumarchais' interesting life. 1775 is the one that is known as The Barber of Seville. 1781 is the one that's known in English as the Marriage of Figaro. That's the one Mozart loved and said almost right after the play came out. And then 1792 is a third Figaro play called La Merco Pabla, which basically means the mother culpable, the mother at fault, the guilty mother. And that play has not been set very often as an opera. It's not as well known, but it was set by a modern French composer named Millot, who taught in Mills College, right near where I am right now, and where your host is from, Oakland, California. And so there's a modern version of that last play, but it's a little problematic. It's definitely a post-revolutionary play where the aristocrats are not so perfect, and the mother in question is one of the main characters from the early plays. And it turns out she has had an illegitimate child by Carabino right before Carabino grows up and goes off to war. So it's sort of like the story of the movie The Graduate, I guess. She's the older married woman, and she has seduced the little young Carabino. So you can see why that play would be a little more difficult to make into a comedy, especially a comedy musical or a comedic opera. So here's a little bit of overview of Beaumarchais' life. You don't have to read this whole slide, but to give you an idea of how diverse his life was, this is kind of an overview of all the things he accomplished. In his teens, as I mentioned, his father was a well-known watchmaker, so he was apprenticed to his father, and he actually improved pocket watches. He made them more reliable. And so in his 20s, the young man had an idea to improve watches and clocks, but he wasn't kind of noble enough and rich enough that he was able to patent his idea. So a family friend stole the idea from him, and that motivated him to get out of clock fixing and watchmaking and try his hand at new and different trades. So he started wearing this red jacket. And this is why Mozart, as a young man and then as a professional, almost all of Mozart's portraits, he's trying to wear a red jacket with the exact same gold trim and the exact same fluffy French cuff as Beaumarchais, to evoke, I am a man of the world, I am a man of many trades, and to show that he sympathizes with Beaumarchais. So in Beaumarchais' 20s, he has the idea to improve the clock. It's stolen from him. He is introduced to the King of France, who says, I hear you're good with really small clocks. I would like you to make a golden ring for my royal mistress with a clock in it so she can tell what time it is and show up when I tell her and not at the wrong time, because it's driving my wife crazy. So the young Beaumarchais is able to create this tiny little clock in a ring. Basically, it's half the size of an Apple Watch, and it worked really well, and it solved the problems of Louis XV. So Louis XV was so impressed, he hired Beaumarchais as a tutor, and Beaumarchais tutored the 4 young princesses. And he became the main harp teacher at the 2 main palaces in France in that period. So he's in with the aristocrats at this point, and he can hang around and hear gossip and collect ideas for future projects. In his 30s, he got married, and that wife died mysteriously. It was rumored that she was poisoned because he inherited a lot of money, and that's when he made up this title for himself, Beaumarchais. He was married again, and she died mysteriously, and it was rumored that maybe she was poisoned. We know a little bit more about being able to diagnose symptoms. Probably the first wife died of tuberculosis, which was very common. And probably the second wife died of something more like flu, something like what Mozart died of. In his 30s, Beaumarchais still was tutoring the royal princesses, but he got sent to be a royal ambassador and emissary of business and got to hang around in Spain. And that's where he developed a love of Spanish stories and Spanish characters. So his character Figaro is a barber in the Spanish city of Seville, and many of his characters are making fun of Spanish aristocrats he met while he was there. The main thing he was trying to do in Spain was researching for French businessmen, researching business in Louisiana. And Louisiana, American Louisiana, was owned by Spain at that point, and he's one of the people that helped convince the French crown to buy Louisiana from Spain. So they didn't actually have it for very long, and after Beaumarchais passed away, only about 10 years later, the current French king would sell Louisiana, and the whole Louisiana center territory. We call it the Louisiana Purchase, to the United States. So he's a cog in that wheel as well. So then his life is going on. He's surviving. Now he's in his 40s, and he begins to write serious dramas, political dramas that mostly get banned after the first time they're heard. The king laughs at them and says, "That's very funny, but no, I'm not going to let you produce that in public," because they tended to make fun of aristocrats and they were very recognizable. So these plays are a lot like Saturday Night Live, for example. Someone will come on, they'll be dressed as a character. Everyone will immediately know which politician they're making fun of. They will understand all the jokes, that kind of thing. So he tried his hand at political satire, and he wrote some comic plays. He also was a French spy. He was sent from France to England to give England incorrect information about the Americans. And he spent a lot of time and effort trying to raise money during the American Revolution for the Americans. He was a gun runner. As he gained more money from his successful work and from the 2 first wives, he was able to buy a whole ship and load it with ammunition and send it to the American colonies so they could use that in the war. And they used it mainly in New York in the Battle of Ticonderoga, one of the turning points of the American Revolution. So it's interesting. He's in with the French aristocrats. He's a servant of the King of France, but he's starting to undermine British aristocrats and the British king. So he's sort of in between worlds in his 40s. He also was a fan of an earlier writer who wrote satire and political plays named Voltaire. That was his pen name. And he was able to get access to a whole bunch of banned plays by Voltaire. Voltaire had been run out of France and had continued to write funny French plays in Russia and other places. And Beaumarchais like, let's get all these plays from the previous generation, let's publish them. And so he published them under an assumed name after buying a printing press. In his 40s, he had 4 different girlfriends. Books usually call them mistresses, but if we use a modern term, he dated basically in his 40s. And he started his famous set of 3 Figaro plays. Barbara of Seville, which is pre-French Revolution, and it has a lot of aristocrats he met in Spain in the 1760s and aristocrats he worked for in France in the 1760s. Then about 6 years later, he writes the second play. Figaro is now sort of coming of age and he's getting married. And so he based some of those escapades on his own marriage and his second marriage. And that's one reason the play really appealed to Mozart. The young Mozart was getting married at exactly that time. So the running around and measuring your room and planning furniture and talking about living with the wife for the first time and writing love songs that appealed to the young Mozart in 1781 when the play came out. Mozart's one of the very first people to buy it in Vienna and start talking to people about how great this French play is. Then Beaumarchais in his 50s was raising money. He actually became quite rich by supplying and bringing in fresh drinking water to Paris. And this is the period leading up to the French Revolution. He was really friendly still with the French king, but especially Queen Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette was one of the princesses from Vienna. And so Mozart had known her when they were young in Austria, and he had known her when they were young. She was sent to the French court to be educated, and he met her there as well. And there is a scene, it's a little bit incorrect, but there is a scene where he is at the French court and he's running around and he's late to conduct one of his own works and he's being scolded. He spoke French beautifully, and so he was able to read Beaumarchais' play in the original French. It got translated into English, and he owned a copy in English. And then there was some question, maybe he could get it translated into Italian and set the play, The Marriage of Figaro, in Italian, the favorite language of opera in Italy at the time. Beaumarchais was also the librettist for new operas at the time, and he never got a chance to work directly with Mozart. I think if Mozart would have lived, that would have been possible. But he was a little bit older, he's a generation older than Mozart. He did write some text for operas by Salieri. He wrote French text, and Salieri set the text in French. Salieri spoke Italian, English, French, and German. And so Salieri corresponded with him in French and set his opera in France. And Salieri's music was performed in Paris. And right around that time is the last of the Figaro plays, The Guilty Mother. It's definitely set after the French Revolution, and it's definitely kind of an anti-aristocratic play. And the king banned it, and then the king's head was chopped off. So then the end of Beaumarchais' life is the 1790s, the period of the French Revolution, and just after. The aristocrats were all getting killed off, so he switched his allegiance, and like the way he had supported the American Revolution, he tried to support the French Revolution, mainly through financial means. And he even spoke out against the revolutionary government to say it had gone too far and they should stop guillotining people in public. And so for that, they exiled him to Germany for 2.5 years. I don't think I put in here his third wife. In his 50s, he married his girlfriend of 12 years, his mistress of 12 years, and they kind of lived happily ever after. So in his 50s and 60s, he was married happily. So this is the person who wrote the text for some of the most famous operas of Mozart's time and was one of Mozart's favorite authors. Let's go on. Here is his main boss on the left, Louis XV. And so if there is a character in a Beaumarchais play of a very powerful male aristocrat, especially if he decides he can have wives and girlfriends, he can break the rules, he can sneak out of the castle and dress as a servant. A lot of those things are modeled after Louis XV, King of France, who employed Beaumarchais as a tutor for his 4 young daughters. During the same time, and featuring very prominently in the play and the movie Amadeus, was the youngish king and emperor of all of Austria-Hungary, based in Vienna, Joseph II. And it's Joseph II's young sister, Marie Antoinette, who would marry into the French family. So those two leaders of countries were people that on the left, Beaumarchais knew and worked for, and on the right, Mozart knew and worked for. You've seen this image of Mozart leading his own opera, and there are some things about it that are correct. He is on the same level as the people seated in the hall. That is correct for the time. The hall would have been glowing brightly with candles that would be lowered. So everybody in the hall would be able to see each other very well the whole time. There was no modern sense of going into the concert hall and having the lights dim. Nobody did that till Richard Wagner in the late 1800s. So everyone could see each other's fashion, everyone could see each other's furniture, and everyone could see what was going on in the orchestra. So we don't know if Mozart sat with his back to the Emperor of Austria. That seems a little surprising to me. But he definitely sat with his hands on the keyboard and nodded more than he conducted in the air. He coached his own singers, he chose his own text, and once in a while he would even kind of help translate the text and turn the text into words or libretto for an opera. On the right is the great love of his life, Constanze Weber, and she was one of 4 girls in her family, and they were all highly trained in music. So she had excellent handwriting and excellent score copying and music copying abilities. So in this portrait, which was made right after they got married in their early 20s, she is holding a huge bunch of music. And if you look really carefully at it, if you squint at it, it says that it is, it's got Mozart's name on it. And it says in French, œuvre de Mozart, so the works of Mozart. And we know what Mozart handwriting looks like a lot of the time, and his scores are often in his own handwriting, but most of the parts, if you had to write out parts for the orchestra, a lot of the parts are in her hand. And if things were getting edited or corrected, those are often in her hand. So she was a really equal partner to him in his project of being a composer and trying to get his works quickly handed out to orchestras so they could be rehearsed once or twice and played in public, and also that some of his works might be published to make a little bit of extra money. And you see their birth and death dates there. He's born in 1756 and lives until 1791, so he's alive during the American Revolution and the beginning of the French Revolution. She is a whole 6 years younger than him, which was a really big deal at the time, and she lived twice as long. She lived more than 50 years longer than Mozart. So a lot of the early writings about him just after his death the first biographies, the collections of his letters, descriptions of his life were based on her memories, and she kind of handpicked some of the people to gather elements of his life into books so that her family could make money. They had 2 children together, and actually those 2 children, after Mozart's death, those 2 children were given free music lessons for as long as they wanted by Antonio Salieri. So he actually had somewhat more of a supportive relationship than you saw in the play and the film. Now, just a little bit about opera. Why do we still make operas? I made a little list here using the letters of the word opera. Opera's been around since about 1600. It starts as an Italian idea to revive ancient Greek theater. And the idea is to be a huge, one great collaboration, to take many of the art forms of the time and mash them up together and put them on the stage kind of equally, and to really feature the human voice, singing text. So Mozart loved to do this. He was involved in training the singers. He was involved in finding producers and talking to builders of sets, so he knew exactly what the production would look like as he was writing for it. And he wrote very quickly and rehearsed very quickly. So he could go from beginning idea to fully completed performance live in just a couple of months. If you compare that to a modern Broadway show, sometimes it takes 2 to 4 years to get the show in shape, to even show it to producers to make money. Then you workshop it for over a year, and then it finally gets to the public, and it might still change at that point. So he's working on a very short timeline, loving the collaboration. And in every case in his life, when he wrote an opera, he's working with close friends. He knows the people writing the story. Sometimes he's hiring his very own friends and his own in-laws to perform and play in the orchestra. P of opera, pathos. Opera is supposed to make you feel something. It is not supposed to make you bored or space out. Every song has one particular message. It's trying to make you feel at least one particular emotion. And if you pay attention to the words and you pay attention to all of the arts framing the words, if it's a successful aria, a successful song, you should feel happy just for that little moment of 3 minutes listening to it. Or you should feel pathos and sadness, and you should cry a little tear. And you should really get into it in the same way that a modern film has a soundtrack that's trying to involve you more emotionally. E of opera, I like to say it's epic and escapist. Very often in Mozart's time, it's history brought to life, and some of his operas are absolutely contemporary with his own time. That's the reason some of the plays are getting banned, and it's a challenge. You have to negotiate exactly how they're being presented. Sometimes they were too close, too satirical, too biting, too much like real politics of the time. R, in opera, I like to think of radiance, and especially in France, they talk about how opera and danced theater has really the responsibility to bring beauty and color and design to the eye of the listener. And this word virtuosity, to showcase the very most difficult or the very most challenging music presented by the very best trained artists in the world. And I say especially France, because France is actually starting in this period, 1700s, real dance academies and real conservatories of music open to men and women, where you can choose the arts as a profession for the first time, and you can study it and get degrees in it at an advanced level. You don't just grow up and in your teenage years apprentice to your father and do what he does. And then lastly, A, the goal now that we have, the reason we still have opera companies, is to bring our public, our listeners, to an appreciation of this sort of old-fashioned art form, and to reinstill it with excitement. And there's still new operas being composed. There are more than 40 a year in the United States alone. They may not all last forever, but they're a way to bring elegance back to the theater, to create grand sets and amazing scenes, and to have sometimes 100, 200, 300 people on the stage, all singing together, all performing together. Now on the left, you see the typical way the character of Figaro is dressed in Beaumarchais' plays. He's actually dressed just like Beaumarchais. And on the right, you see Mozart's favorite portrait of himself, and he's wearing almost the exact same jacket that Beaumarchais had been wearing in the portrait painted 40 years earlier. The character of Susanna, the love interest of Figaro, is very often updated. So I wanted to show you a contrasting idea. Sometimes these plays are updated. On the left, some of the Figaro plays have been set in the 1920s. On the right, sometimes they are set in the 1960s, and they're kind of updated to the politics of the time. So you see designers making the first steps toward that. One of the reasons that we know so much about Mozart is that we can look at his original handwriting on manuscripts. And so if you find his actual writing on paper, he actually used, and he drew the lines himself, we call it an autograph manuscript. And this is a little duet. In the top in cursive, you can see it says duettino, kind of small. And underneath it, it says who's singing, Susanna e Carabino. So Susanna is the higher voice, and Carabino is written on the lower line. And above it, you see the whole orchestra just written in 3 or 4 lines. So it's very light texture, basically strings with just a little bit of band instruments, a little bit of woodwinds. And the voices, when they come in, if you kind of look at this, you've got 4 measures of instrumental music. And when the voices come in, the instruments above them have lots of rests and silences to really feature the voices. There are collections of Mozart's manuscripts all over the world. And after he died, a few of his scores were broken up and the pages were sold individually, which is kind of shocking to us now because they're great works of art. It'd be like cutting the Mona Lisa into tiny scraps and selling it. But they totally would have cut the Mona Lisa into tiny scraps and sold it. That was very common. For example, the American flag that we think of as the Star-Spangled Banner, the one that was flying over the fort of Baltimore, Fort McHenry in 1814, when the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem poem, was written. That flag, the family that owned it, cut up that flag, even cut a star out of it, and they would give it away, little bits away as presents. So it's amazing to me that Mozart's manuscripts have survived to us 250 years later, mostly intact, and that you can study exactly how he did it. You can see, for example, this song at the top where it says duettino. If you look across the top, he had written scene 3 in Italian, then he crossed it out and he wrote 4 next to it in Roman numerals. He wrote some text underneath the Susanna part, and she's saying, oh no, hurry, run away. Oh no, hurry, run away. And then he's writing underneath that, Susanna needs to be calling through the door to Carabino that something's wrong. These are the 2 people who premiered the leading roles in the Marriage of Figaro. You get a sense of the fashion of the day. Nancy Storace, a British soprano, was the first Susanna, and Francesco Benucci from Italy, a comic baritone, a really great actor, was the first Figaro. Here's an example of Beaumarchais' writing, and this is why his plays were getting banned. The main character, it's been 2.5 hours of the play. The main character stands up in Act 5 and as a solo, as a monologue, looks directly in the face of the King of France and says this line: "No, my Lord Count, you shan't have her." Basically, you can't have my girlfriend. Just because you're a great nobleman, you think you're a great genius, what have you done to deserve such advantages? Unless there is liberty to criticize, praise has no value. So he's basically saying, although I'm just a servant, you cannot take my girlfriend and sleep with her. She's going to be my wife. You cannot do that. You don't deserve it. I must be free to speak my mind, even though I am just a man. So you can see that this, in an age of revolution, this was pretty close to dangerous, almost seditious speech. And Mozart, as a young man, thought this was awesome. This is exactly the way he talked to his father and talked to his employers. This often got him fired. This is the typical set design for an Italian opera in this period. Doorways, a little bit of furniture, and that's it. You're asked to imagine the set. And only in France were they building huge set designs with huge scenic effects, like a modern Broadway stage. So you imagine everything, and the music does the work for you. Let's look at just a couple of quick examples of text by Beaumarchais, and then I'm going to show you a couple of opera excerpts. This is the beginning of the play, The Marriage of Figaro. This was a scene that Mozart kept. Figaro is counting and measuring. Then Susanna, the fiancée, says, look at me, I'm wearing my new bonnet for the wedding. And they sing together, everything's great, and then they have a conversation. So let me show you what this looks like actually in the opera. Move this over, move this down. I have to make it a little smaller. Okay, and I want to find you the opera excerpt. So I have a little YouTube thing over here. And this is the scene in Italian at the beginning of Marriage of Figaro. And so to Beaumarchais, he himself is the young Figaro, and he is playing with his second wife. To the young Mozart, who set this in an Italian version, this is the young Mozart setting up house with his wife Constanza, and it has English subtitles. And they finally sing together. Okay, so that you're supposed to feel delight and charm, and you're supposed to have a sense that everything's possible in the world and it'll all work out for these servants, and they will be happy and they'll get exactly what they want. Now let's look at a contrasting text. I mentioned that character of the little cherub, the Carabino. This is a high role, and it's very often, almost always, sung by a woman dressed as a boy. And you might think that's sort of an odd thing, because in the fashion of this period, you can reveal so much with women's fashion. The top of the dresses are open, for example, long, flowing, beautiful, elegant garments. But a lot of people in this period thought it was actually kind of sexier to dress the female singers as boys and let them sing the part of boys, because it was the only way in public you could see a woman's legs. Everyone in the theater knew it was a woman singing the role of the young boy, and she's dressed as a boy, pretending to be a boy, but at the same time the audience is like, ooh, look at the legs of that woman on the stage. You would never see that from the real fashion of the time. The whole woman's lower body would be covered. So it's this weird mix of elements of cross-dressing and elements of gender confusion, and a woman portraying a young boy falling in love. So here's what she sang, or he, I guess, Carabino. Doesn't really matter if it's male or female or some kind of blurred thing. It's about feeling the first press of young love. I forget where I am. I forget where I'm going. I'm hot. I'm cold. I fall apart. I blush. I'm overwhelmed. So what does that look like when we see it on stage? And there's a whole second part to the aria where the person says, basically, I'm going to cry out to nature. And there's a long list of all the ways that, you know, maybe I will be able to feel satisfied in nature. And there's a lot of famous drawings and engravings, both of Beaumarchais' play and of Mozart's setting of this play, The Marriage of Figaro. And so you have Susanna being surprised that this young boy is interested in her, and the young boy is saying, you know, oh, I'm overwhelmed, and she ends up hiding him in a chair or in a cupboard. He's not supposed to be found in the room. There's all sorts of fun farcical things you can do with that. Now, the scene where she hides him, that was the scene I showed you. Let me just go back for a second. That image of Mozart's handwriting. This is the scene. So you have da da dum, da da dum, da da dum, da da dum, da 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 dum, and then she goes, and she sings really fast. You know, get out of here, hide. You know, don't get caught. Hurry, hurry, catastrophe! You've got to get away. So let me play the music, but leave this slide on so you can actually see the words going by. Stretch the slide out a little bit, and I'll move the slide as you hear the music. So she So it's a whole scene. And if you look back at that manuscript, just to get a sense, one thing the play Amadeus does really well, I think, is it tries to convey the sense of fantastic genius, how fast Mozart could compose this music. So you have da 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 da. So this is maybe, I don't know, 5 seconds of music, 8 seconds of music, and you have to make all these decisions and write all this down, and it's going to be a whole 2-minute scene. And he can basically write it almost as fast as you can sing it. And there are a lot of witnesses to this that were just amazed. It was clearly already all in his head, and he would just make the dots as fast as he could possibly write them. So if you could transport yourself back in time, you should definitely take him a computer and some you know, Finale or some kind of online program so that he would be able to write faster. He probably would have written 20 operas if he'd had the time to do it. Last thing I want to play for you is one of Figaro's love songs. And this is Jose Van Damme singing. It starts with Figaro singing, and he'll have a second page of text where he sings to Susanna. And Susanna is dressed as the Countess, and she thinks she's fooling her husband, but he is not fooled. So it's sort of a trick and a love duet all at once. Very beautiful piece by Mozart. Let's make sure the volume is up. It is. He's singing to the disguised girlfriend, disguised as Countess. So you get a sense that there's kind of two different stories going on at once. They're both singing very sweetly. They have slightly different music, and that allows Susanna to portray this character who's sort of rejecting a suitor. Is this too sudden? You want to feel my hand? You're a seducer. You're disgusting. And at the same time, Figaro's music is beautiful and fluid and connected, and he's trying to convince the person that he is in love, that kind of thing. And at the end, both the voices come together. They sing matching harmonies, they sing matching rhythms. And it's a way of Mozart taking a complex text and really bringing it to life. So I guess the picture I like the best of all these different pictures I was showing you is this one, where you have the character of Figaro on the left, which is sort of Beaumarchais himself, the idealized up-and-coming servant, the man of the new world, the man of the Enlightenment. And I guess now we might use the phrase jack of all trades. In the original play, he calls himself a factotum, someone that's able to accomplish everything. And that's definitely how Beaumarchais saw himself throughout his life and how Mozart wanted to be seen. He was well known as a leader of orchestras, as someone who was a great chamber music player and a great partner and friend to people in clubs and in orchestral settings. He was a well-trained church musician who's fluent in 5 languages. He was one of the best traveled people of his time that wasn't a professional soldier. And he had been able to rise to the height of his profession and be considered equal in some senses to the aristocrats of his time, very much as Beaumarchais, the author, had started out as a servant, a fixer of watches, a tutor to little tiny princesses, and had sort of risen up to have the ear of the king, and after that, of some of the revolutionaries and leaders of France. So that's why I really like this picture. It sort of shows Mozart literally putting on the cloak of Beaumarchais and showing that he is all grown up, he is a man of the world, he's ready to accomplish great things. So that is kind of it for me. Hopefully you'll get a chance to listen to more than just Amadeus. The soundtrack for Amadeus has a really great overview of a lot of works he composed while he was living in Vienna. So it's some of his best works of his late 20s and early 30s. So that's a great place to start. But you should definitely watch Marriage of Figaro. It's hilarious. And there are many, many versions on YouTube. If you just type in the name of any opera now to YouTube and you type in the phrase English surtitles, you can get your own personalized version and know what's going on, even if you don't speak Italian and French and all these older European languages. So that is great, but it sounds like a really fun course. I'm glad you're kind of diving into the history first and then emerging in the world of music.
Thank you, Laura. Great lecture.
Sure.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah, yeah. Do we have any questions tonight? Oh, I see a lot of hand claps here. That's nice.
That's nice. Thank you.
A lot of work goes into these, and we really appreciate it.
I'm just amazed how much they could get done in a time before heat and air conditioning and deodorant and dentistry and all the things we rely on to keep our modern lives ticking along. You know, he was never rich enough that he owned his own carriages and horses. So he always had to kind of rent something to get somewhere. And it's amazing how much travel he did in that environment. Bumpy roads and bandits holding up his carriage and stealing his materials. And
yeah. It's amazing, really, what people had to deal with, and still could be creative and put so much out there that has lasted.
You can really only work during the daytime. There were almost no nighttime concerts except in the opera house in Paris because they were afraid of burning everything down. Yeah. So you had to, come in the afternoon and be done by dark, or people couldn't get home.
We have some questions here.
Sure.
Let's see. Oh, here's one. Was a castrato used for the Carabino role? For the
castrato was never used for the Carabino role because castrato voice was much louder and stronger. There were still castratos working, and Mozart and his dad were friends with them, but they tended to use them as church soprano soloists. Vienna didn't use castratos quite as much in this period. They were definitely hiring a lot of women opera singers, and Mozart's own sisters-in-laws were very popular stars at the time. So a castrato in the early 1700s would be playing gods and noblemen and angels and these sort of characters that are almost above humans. You wouldn't find a castrato as often for like a realistic human little boy. That'd be much more likely to be sung by a woman dressed as a boy.
I thought there was another question here. Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, I mean, it was still technically legal in Italian states to make someone a castrato with the parents' permission in the early 20th century. It wasn't fully illegal until just over 100 years ago. So there's a connection to a particular kind of powerful high male voice, especially for hero characters, all throughout the early history of opera.
Megan, did you have a question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So you guys were talking a little bit about the marriage that Mozart had with his wife, and I was just wondering, was that one of the rare instances where he had a partnership rather than more of like her husband did everything for her kind of a thing? Because I feel like during those time frames in history, we really see more of the male figure always like leading and the females following in that time. So it was interesting to see that she helped a lot more.
Among the circles that the Mozarts ran around with in Vienna, it was not uncommon. Mozart was friends with the husbands of all of her sisters, and they tended to marry musician to musician, that bunch of people. So there were a group of about 16, 8 married women and 8 married men, where they were all performing and they were all sort of helping each other's careers. And all of those married couples, the people that were Mozart's favorite musicians to work with, and the women who were opera singers, tended to have a smaller number of children. And I don't know if that's because they had access to, I guess, what we'd now call medicines, but they knew how to manipulate plants and things to keep the woman from being pregnant for 40 years of her life, because that was one of the earlier things that really made it impossible for women to, if they worked at all or if they wanted to help in a professional capacity, to be able to do it. So Constanza, his wife, was only pregnant 4 times, and she had 2 boys who lived past childhood. And that for her, as a working person, as a person that was involved with her husband's career, that was sort of a crucial difference in her life. Whereas Bach, who was only living one generation, well, 2 generations earlier, he was active in the early 1700s. Bach was married and he had 10 children with the first wife, and about half of them survived. And then the wife died in childbirth. And he had a second wife, and he had about 10 children with that wife, and about half of them survived. So they had a total of 20 children and 10, living to take care of and to raise and to train. And many of them became composers. But the house was full of children, and the wife was just compelled to run the household in a way that Constanza and her sisters really were not. They had just enough money that they had housekeepers to help them. They lived in reasonable sized apartments. They didn't have huge houses and estates. And they were also not servants living in one room in the basement. So they had this cool transitional world of the evolving proletariat, the evolving middle class, where the women got to kind of have careers. And Constanza was a good singer. She was actually featured in a few of his really great church pieces. He took her to Salzburg and she sang the soprano solo in one of his big masses with orchestra. But she didn't have a love of acting in the theater like a couple of her sisters did. So some of those famous soprano roles that Mozart wrote, like the Queen of the Night, who sings these really high notes and kind of goes crazy and is the angry fairy witch princess in the Magic Flute, that was written for one of his sister-in-laws, for example. And all of those married couples had pretty equal partnerships as far as work and life at home. I don't know if it had to do with the fact that most of them were also Masons, because the Masons at the time were talking about how women should be equal to men in some ways, and how women should be allowed to enter some professions and receive, for example, their magazine, the big Masonic temple put out that had news of scientific experiments and news of world travel. They didn't restrict that magazine to men. They would send it to women and sell it to women, and women could subscribe and women could hear some of the public talks. So it may have had a little bit to do with that scene in Vienna at the time.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Someone wrote in the chat, is Susanna and Carabino based on Psyche and Eros? I don't think they are, just because the Beaumarchais plays in general tend to be very easily traced to particular real aristocrats and real people he tutored, and not so much Greek mythology in general. But it's true, everybody was well read in classics, that was considered educated. So they would have seen, the idea of Eros, sometimes we call him Cupid. He's surrounded by cherubs floating around with arrows. The Eros love god character and Carabino have a little bit in common. But Carabino is not the god of love. Carabino is completely overwhelmed with love. He's not in control of his passions, and he's not the master of his destiny at all. So he is definitely not able to ascend to the level of Eros, who chooses who to shoot arrows of love into. But yeah, they would definitely get that sense of comparison. That's a great question. Yeah, and I guess my main idea to you is that when Peter Shaffer wrote Amadeus, and it's based on several earlier plays, including a Russian play Pushkin wrote called Mozart and Salieri, there was an attempt based on all kinds of legends and stories that had cropped up to kind of enhance this sense of tension at the court in Vienna, and to make the characters as different as possible for dramatic effect. And the more you read Mozart's letters, the more you realize he was hilarious and fun-loving and relaxed, and was able to write in formal style and informal style, and was very informal with his friends, and especially old acquaintances like the person that became Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. He wrote her absolutely hilarious, vulgar letters in French that you would only write to someone you'd known since you were 6 years old. They would call each other animal names, and just really a fun-loving, kind of wild and crazy, relaxed guy, more like Steve Martin than anybody else I can think of in modern life. Pick up an instrument, play it, tell a joke, run in, show up late, apologize, fix everything, that kind of thing. So I find him really charming. It's too bad he didn't live a lot longer. I think he would have done great things in the early 1800s as the world changed.
Okay, thank you, Laura. We need a code word for tonight. So what's your favorite dessert?
My favorite dessert. Let's see. What's something I haven't had for a while? Waffles. Waffles would
Waffles.
work. Yep.
Waffles is a great choice, since we were talking about all these waffles.
Yeah, like WAFFLES. Waffles.
That's right. Thank you, everyone. I'll hang out here for a while if you have questions about things about the course or anything else that comes to mind. And please, one more time, applause for Laura. Thank you for coming out and meeting with us tonight over Zoom.
Let me just, if anybody's interested, let me just put in the chat the YouTube links that I just played, because some people said they were having some trouble hearing them. I didn't really pick these because I think they're like the very best ones ever in the history of the opera. I just wanted certain sounds for this thing. So here's the last one. Let me find, that's sort of the love duet sounding one. And then let's see, aprite. Okay, the second one will be the one where Susanna's saying, hurry up, get out of here, disappear. And then, let me see. Nope, that's it again. Hang on a second. The second thing I played was Carabino singing Non So Più. That's probably the most famous one of all the Carabino arias. And you can find many different versions of that. I think I was using, yes, I was using Isabel Leonard because she doesn't sing it so fast that you can't follow it. So those were the three main links that I used. But as long as you add to your YouTube search, YouTube and Sir titles or subtitles. Oh, it keeps changing it to sub. Just a second, see if it'll send it. Subtitles or Sir titles. You can watch the whole opera and have a great idea of what's going on. It's much better than the old-fashioned way where you just show up and they're singing it in whatever language it's in and you have no idea what's going on and you just take it. So this is great. And the Met in the seats right in front of you, you can push a button and you can change the language of the subtitles. It shows it right in your seat at the Metropolitan Opera. So I hope San Francisco, they're replacing their seats. I hope San Francisco adds that too. So if you speak Chinese, you can push the button and you can read Chinese of what's going on, and you could read English and you could read Spanish, and that would be a really great benefit using our new technology. So great. All right, so I'll log out. We thank you very much, and hopefully you find things to enjoy about this guy. He has a really great personality, really beautiful contributor of music to Western music. Bye.
All right, thank you, Laura. Have a good evening. Hi, Nathan. I see you have some things in the chat there. Questions about the course, maybe? You can actually come off of mute if you want to talk.
Are you talking about me?
Is this Nathan?
Oh, nope.
Or Megan? Nathan?
Oh, okay. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello, Nathan. Yeah.
Okay, so I bought the book, right? And I'm looking at the modules, and so just like for like unit 1, it's like it talks about like it says like required the book and then like webcon. What does it mean? Just like log in and then do that.
So you're in Canvas, right? And you're looking at the modules, and there's a weekly module, correct? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And although I've told you that you can work through the book in a self-paced way if you'd like, and through all those exercises, I also give you a kind of a suggested program of study. So
Okay.
you'll see each week, I'll give you the units to help you complete the course by the end of your 8-week term. I think you just said you're in the 8-week class,
Okay.
right? Yeah. So that's a suggested topics for you. And then you'll also see a discussion board in there. Those are weekly and they close each week. So you
Okay.
do have to complete those each week. And the lectures, of course, like tonight, are part of that. And remember that the class is built on a points accrual method. So what you're trying to do is gather enough points to have 9,000 points in the class for an A. I'm assuming you want an A in the class. And there are more points available in the course, probably about 15,000 points available if you did everything and you got a perfect score and everything. So what you should be looking at is completing as many points as you can to get to the grade level that you'd like to. 3,000 of your points must be from the online textbook. So you have a minimum there. That's really the only requirement. And everything else then is up to you to work
So
on,
wait,
and I'll help you with that. Yeah.
how do we use like the online textbook? Like I don't. So I'm looking at module 1, and
Mhm.
like I don't really see any way how to use the online textbook currently. Like
Did you acquire it yet?
yeah, I have to acquire it. I have the book.
You have the
Like
book.
yeah.
Okay, so when you sign into the book, right, you'll see
Mm-hmm.
Unit 1, and
Oh, okay.
you'll read all the information there, and then you'll take the lesson, right? There's a lesson exam for each unit. And then at the end of I'm sorry, each unit has a group of 5 lessons in it. That's how it works.
Okay.
And then each of those 5 lessons, there's a little kind of, I don't know, a short exam. And then you have the unit exam at the end, right? And all of that goes into the grade book in the textbook.
Okay.
At the end of the term, I import all the points that you earn there from that textbook back into your Canvas site and add that to whatever other points you have in Canvas for your final
Okay.
grade. Yeah.
All right. That's all I just wanted to know. Like
Yeah,
it's
good
my
questions.
first week here.
Yeah, no, it can be confusing, so I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, I was just like I came in, I was just really lost. I was just taking notes.
Yeah, good. All right, well, keep it up. If you have anything, let me know.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Hello, Megan. Did you have something? Khan?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, hi, Megan. Yes.
Hey, I was just gonna say I was gonna ask you a question, but I think you just answered. So all of the textbook and quizzes and stuff that we have taken in on our book site is going to be transferred at the end of the semester.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Khan, do you have a question? Kara Ann, did you have a question? Hello, Richard. You guys may have all stepped away. And so I'm going to call it an evening. If you do have questions or anything else, please feel free to send me an email, text me. All right. Good night, everyone.